I never thought that was a sentence that I'd be saying out my mouth, being in the presence of a sexpert.
I realized also there was so much appetite for these kinds of conversations and safe spaces for people to talk about sex, but also to learn about their bodies, learn about pleasure.
People would rather snap their leg in half, I think, than admit that they've had erectile dysfunction or they're struggling with keeping it up. Is there any pieces of advice you can give them without seeing them face to face that you can give on this pod to say, these are some steps that you could do if you're struggling to orgasm with your partner or by yourself? What can they do to start that process?
I would always say you need to start with yourself in terms of understanding what turns you on. And I say that great sex with yourself unlocks great sex with others.
Welcome to Abnormal, the podcast for normal people who want to do abnormal things. Today, I'm joined by sex expert Sara Tang. Sara Tang. Sarah? Sara Tang. I never thought that was a sentence that I'd be saying out my mouth, being in the presence of a sexpert.
Really?
Well, it's kind of, this is the episode that I've been most nervous for. My hands are sweaty. Preparing for this episode is so different to the one previous guest that I've had. Normally I'd dig into their past and everything. And this time I tried to do that.
You
but
can
I
dig
also
into my past. That's
I
okay.
just asked my followers a load of sex questions and I've got so many DMs to ask you.
I look forward to all of them.
So I think by the end of the episode, we'll do a small section at the end of Q&A, which is where I'll go through the DMs.
Okay.
And you can answer their questions as deep and non-deep as you want.
Fabulous.
But in the meantime,
Thank you for having me on here to start with.
Well, thank you for coming on. It's one I've been very much anticipating.
Yeah.
But Sarah, I'd love to know a little bit more about you for the context of the episode and for everyone listening. So first of all, can you tell us exactly what is a sex expert?
Well, how I usually talk about myself is I usually call myself a sexologist or a sex coach. And a sexologist really is somebody who has studied sex. So if you can think about a biologist being someone who has studied biology or anthropology, that's just simply what a sexologist is. I think also sometimes in order for people to understand that a little bit better, I also call myself a sex coach because people really understand the idea of coaching. And I know that you yourself have a pro athlete background, and
I'm not sure if I can call myself a pro athlete in this context, but we'll see.
But you must have been the recipient of lots of coaching, and people generally understand what coaching actually means, which is all about helping you to achieve your goals, right? Whatever goals that may be in the bedroom or beyond.
Oh, I love it. I mean, I'm already excited. So how do you get into something like this? It seems like such a stupid question, but normally people have their own career paths and whatnot. But how do you kind of get into this industry, or what was your story building up to this?
Well, okay, where to start? I would say a lot of my motivations for why I became a sexologist is very personal, because I grew up in a very religious, very conservative Asian upbringing. I'm from Singapore originally, and sex was completely taboo in my family. I had what I would call a very inadequate sex education, which I can only describe as fear-based and reproduction-oriented.
How to make kids.
Yes, or not make kids.
All that.
Because, teenage pregnancy and STIs and all of these
All
bad
the scary
things.
stuff.
All the scary stuff that will happen to you. And I personally experienced a lot of guilt and shame growing up. And it had a real impact on my relationships, on my health, and on my confidence. So I actually then had this kind of background. And I went to the States, and that was actually the first time I actually understood that sexuality could even be a subject that could be studied. So I took a semester at the university I was at, which was Stanford University, and I learned about human sexuality. And that semester had a huge impression on me because, given my upbringing, that was really, really mind opening. I had never even before met, for example, a gay person. I'm sure there were lots of gay people in Singapore and in my milieu and in my community, but I had never really met one and never really talked to one, not to mention trans person, people who were kinky, uh, and I didn't really even understand the full breadth of sexuality. And that's what studying it actually gave to me. And so that semester really left a big impression on me. And I would say that was like the first turning point. It gave me that initial spark of interest about human sexuality as a subject, as a topic of study. Uh,
How old were you at this point?
oh, as an undergrad, I was 19.
18, 19? Yeah,
Yeah.
19. Okay.
Yeah. Um, and then I would say the next turning point for me was actually when I moved to Hong Kong. And that must have been 2007. And I met a woman, my friend Heather, and she was a sexologist. And that was the first time that I actually understood that uh, a sexologist is a job. It's a career profession. It's not one of those things which you grow up thinking, oh, what do you want to be when you grow
It's
up?
definitely not.
I want to be a sexologist.
Imagine talking to your career coach saying that.
Yeah. So I didn't really understand that, oh, this is actually what somebody could do. And this is how someone could help other people in their sex lives. So I actually shadowed her. I was extremely, extremely interested in what she did. And she allowed me to kind of follow her around. And at the time, she was hosting these sex toy parties. And they are these events for women where you kind of bring a bunch of sex toys and you teach and educate women about how to use them, but also just generally about pleasure. And so I followed her around doing these parties. She was also at the time studying for her PhD in human sexuality. And she was also doing a little bit of clinical work, so working with clients as well. She then left Hong Kong, and I decided that, well, now that I followed her around and shadowed her doing sex toy parties, there seemed to be a bit of a niche. I realized also there was so much appetite for these kinds of conversations and safe spaces for people to talk about sex, but also to learn about their bodies, learn about pleasure. So I decided to start my own business. It was called Passionately Yours at the time, and I sold sex toys. And I did that for a couple of years. So that was the next sort of chapter.
Can I just interrupt you there?
Yeah.
And I feel incredibly crude
Mhm.
asking this question, but I feel like there's going to be a lot of questions during this
Sure.
talk.
Yeah.
A sex toy party.
Yes.
I've got an image in my head of what that looks like.
Uh-huh.
Can you help me actually think about what that actually looks like? Is it
Okay.
fully clothed and you're just talking about the toy?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sorry, this is
It's
me.
not an
My
orgy.
first stupid question of the talk.
Okay. I mean, it's not an orgy. It is more of an educational event where women come. It's fully clothed. We would usually set out the toys on the table, and there is a lot of interactivity with the toys. So people may try the toys on their nose, for example.
Ah.
Because a lot of the times, vibrators, you can feel the strength of vibration often through your nose very well. And you can gauge how powerful a vibrator is by putting it to your nose. So there'll be like little um, interactive pots like that. People might also try on some of they'll take stuff to the washroom and they'll try on little cooling gels. I'll give them like little samples or warming gels. Um, but most of all, it was much more educational. There would be a lot of talking about where everything is in terms of the female genitalia.
Mm.
And actually, what I learned, and I was very surprised by this, was that a lot of women don't actually fully understand where everything is, how things should or, would feel good being stimulated. And often the sex toys just opened up conversations about pleasure, about, the anatomy. And that's what I really enjoyed the most about them.
That's really cool. The women that would sign up to these type of events,
Mm-hmm.
how do they like go about doing that? You said there was quite a community and you were surprised by the number of people that were interested in this niche.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like something that people would happily go to in a safe space, but wouldn't maybe be as open and publicly talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So how did these women kind of like find out about these sort of groups and classes?
Yeah, I think that it was very unique at the time. So there wasn't anybody else doing it besides me, for example. And we would often book a sort of a room in the bar upstairs, which would be private.
Mm.
Or I could also go to somebody's home or a hotel room. So it would be a safe space in terms of the actual venue.
But when you'd go to someone's home or a hotel room, it would still be a group of people?
Yes.
Yeah.
And they would often invite their friends. So it almost became a little bit like a girls' night out,
Yeah, that's
like
quite
a
cool.
like
Yeah.
a Tupperware party, but with kind of sexy plastic.
That's cool. That's cool. And then, so eventually you were doing that.
Mhm.
You were shadowing Heather, was it?
Mhm.
And then you took that over?
Yeah, I started my own thing, but I took a lot of what I learned from Heather
Yeah.
and I brought it to my own business. And
And then what's the progression from
Yeah,
that with the sex
sure.
toys? And then now we're
I ran that for a couple of years and I closed it, not because it didn't make money. It was actually a very profitable business, but it was also my first business and it was my baby. And I poured so much of my heart, soul, labor into it that I burnt out. And being in events, uh, is actually very, very labor intensive. And at some point, I think I just ran out of steam. And the things that I also realized something about myself, the things that I really didn't enjoy about that business was the sort of the distribution, the supply, the inventory part of
operational
that,
side.
all of
Yeah.
the retail operations, fulfillment part of the business. What I really enjoyed was talking to people about sex. And so I took that learning from that business and I decided that the next time that I came back to working in the field of sexual wellness, I wanted to be around this idea of talking to people and helping them, educating them about sexual wellness. I then moved back into a corporate job, just as a reset. And I started to, so sorry, I moved back into a corporate job. And then I decided, okay, I really am not feeling like this corporate job is very meaningful at this point of time.
You and millions of others.
Yes. And I had a friend and a colleague at the time who also felt the same way. And he was a bit of like an audio geek, I must say. So he actually had bought a whole bunch of audio equipment. And he said, I've got a whole bunch of podcasting equipment. And we were both looking for a creative outlet at that time. And so we said, well, why don't we just start a podcast? And that must have been 2017. And at that time, I had also started a coaching certification, which would lead on to sex coaching and which would lead on to my sexologist certification. But I was doing that in parallel. And I was just, okay, so for giggles, I was also thinking, well, why don't I do a podcast? Because I had collected all of these questions from all of these women who I had done parties with. Where is the G-spot? Is this sex toy going to make my husband want to have sex with me? How do I introduce sex toys into the bedroom if I've never used one before with a partner? So I collected just all these questions and I said, this would all be a great podcast and I would like to talk about all of these topics. And because of that, Better in Bed was born.
It's brilliant. I mean, I've listened to a few of the episodes.
Yeah.
It's a really great podcast.
Thank you.
I mean, as you say, everything's so clickable. All the titles are so clickable because they're things that people think themselves in their own heads.
Yeah.
They maybe won't talk about with their partner even or their friends, but they'll listen to on the train. Completely anonymous, but they'll listen to it.
Yeah.
Whilst all this is going on, did anyone from back home, your family or friends or anything, did they know all of this? And what, if so, what did they think about you going down this career route?
Well, my family is very religious, still is very religious. And I think that when I first started, working in the field of sexual wellness, they were like, what is this? Especially the sex toys. They didn't get the sex toys at all. They didn't understand how sex toys could be used to help to enhance a relationship. They have very old school ideas of what sex toys are, and maybe a lot of people still have that idea. And I think they preferred to not talk about it, which I think is very typical also of my family and sexual topics, because that's kind of how I grew up.
That's your education.
Yes. And I told them about it, though. And my dad was like, okay, right. Let's go for dinner. So that was...
Do you think there's something to be said for, like you spoke about your education, your sex education at the start, how it was, I want to use the word suppressed or like very old school. And often people that live that upbringing, sometimes they're the ones that have the complete 180 and U-turn. And now you started a sex toy company. And it was like, how can you predict what's going to happen there? But do you think that's partly to do with it, having the education that you did have?
Yeah. In terms of me or in terms of my parents?
Both. Like you were the one that went through that education at home or at school. I don't know where it was, but do you think that suppression or lack of open education kind of had that effect on you to be doing what you're doing now?
On me?
On you?
Absolutely. Because I think that I was so excited by the idea that, wow, this is something that has been so taboo and now it's so open. And that was so mind-blowing for me. And I was always quite a rebellious teenager, rebellious teen. I always questioned stuff. I was the little girl that would question, why doesn't Jesus let us have pop music?
Yeah, I did exactly the
Why
same. I
does
got kicked out of school for it.
Yeah, and oh, you did.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was not the Sunday school teacher's pet at all. And I love to challenge, I love to question, and I think I gave my parents a really hard time when I was growing up. In fact, because the more that they would throw the Bible at me, the more I would say, this doesn't make sense, and I would do the exact opposite. So I think that I was prime candidate
Yeah.
for
This flip.
yeah,
This
absolutely.
alternative
For the
universe.
flip.
Yeah.
Yes. For my parents, though, I have been working on them. And I've been working on them for about the last 20 years.
Wow.
And I would say where they are now is they have started to recognize the value in my work. And that actually came because of some of the legitimacy that I got from being featured in the media and having the podcast do well. And when the podcast was picked up by The Guardian and SEMP, and it was voted the best sex podcast, and I would send all these articles to them, right? And them being Asian parents, they're just Asian pride, validation. My daughter is in the SCMP. My daughter is in Tatler. Doesn't matter why she's there, but she's in there.
Don't read the article. Just know she's in there.
Yeah, she's in there. So I think they've slowly come round. And who knows? I have hope for them. Maybe they will also make the eventual flip at some point. It's never too late.
Maybe you can have them as guests on your podcast.
Yeah, they're in their 70s now, but that was
I love
next.
that. I was thinking when you were talking then, your clients now, or people you're trying to reach or get your message out to, would you say that it's people like yourself if in another universe where you hadn't had that flip and changed and everything? Because people will go their whole lives on the same route as what you were on in terms of having an old school sex education and an old school upbringing. And people go their whole lives without having that enlightenment like you've had.
Yeah.
And your message, other sex therapists or sex experts, messages, sex coaches, sorry, I assume they're people they're trying to reach as well to kind of open their eyes as to there's a big world out there which you're all missing out on.
Yeah, yeah. So that's really the reason why I started the podcast. The reason was because I wanted to normalize the conversations we have around sex and inspire people to get better in bed. And it is also because it fills a gap in terms of the conversations that I would have liked to have had access to when I was growing up. And I didn't. And in terms of the clients that I work with as well, I often say that, I really enjoy what lights me up the most is often working with clients who have a very similar cultural upbringing or similar level of sex education as I did. So who were just underserved by their sex education. And I always find that really fulfilling because when you have a client like that and you're able to get them to the point where they have these aha moments about sex, which are just completely different from how they were brought up or how they were conditioned, then it feels really satisfying for me.
What's in terms of your clients, your audience, people coming to you for coaching, is there like a typical person? Is it more couples, individuals, men, women?
I would say because my story and I guess my personal brand out there in terms of who I am, people who listen to my podcast, they know that I've had a whole journey in terms of sexual shame and guilt. Often I think I attract clients who are struggling with those kinds of issues as well.
Can you just what is sexual shame? What is sexual shame? I actually don't know what it is.
You don't know what okay. Well, a lot of our relationship with a lot of us have a very broken relationship with our sexuality. And that's because in society, we see that sex is taboo. And often, if we have very conservative upbringings, it's different for everyone. But for religious upbringings, like I had, sex is seen as dirty or taboo, or and you're just wrong. It's wrong to do it, and that's how I felt when I was growing up, because I felt dirty and ashamed and wrong for even touching myself. Self pleasure, that's also considered shameful. And in the words of like a famous sex shame researcher, I think she's an overall shame researcher to start with, but I think I could apply it very easily to sex. It's a woman called Brene Brown. She says the difference between guilt and shame is that guilt is, oh, I feel bad because I've done something wrong. And shame is, I am bad. So I am broken. I am dirty. I am wrong. And it's a very, very deep internalized feeling. And it can come out in all kinds of ways in your relationship and in your sexual interactions with others.
And so that's a large issue that a lot of people come to you for help for.
Yes. I mean, often they will come to me for different kinds of presenting symptoms. But when you work backwards,
It goes down
to a certain amount of shame. So, for example, someone might come to me and they feel like they're not very confident in terms of whenever they have sex with their partners. And it comes down to the fact that they don't actually ask for what they want. They don't ask their partners for what they want. So therefore, they're not confident. And therefore, in the end, as a result, they don't have a lot of pleasure in the bedroom, because whatever is happening in the bedroom just isn't very satisfying for them. And when you ask them, well, why don't you ask for what you want? Why don't you just talk to your partner and say, I would like you to do this. Oh, I couldn't do that. No, I couldn't say that. Like, and then you track it back, even and I say, well, why couldn't you say that? How does that make you feel if you actually said something like that? And then they'll say, oh, it's because I just don't know. I don't even know what I want, right? And then you track it even. You just keep digging, right? You keep digging and you go, well, why don't you know what you want? And often it really comes down to the root cause being, a lot of the times people who have shame, they don't feel worthy of asking for what they want. And it's that deep sense of unworthiness that keeps you from having pleasure and feeling confident in the bedroom.
And that manifests itself in, I'm sure, more ways than just in the bedroom, right?
Yeah.
But so you're peeling it back layer by layer by layer.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it's different for everyone, but that whole process you've described there, is there like a rough timeline on how long it takes to get to the core of things? Is it like one session, or is it like over a period of time, lots of work, it takes time to peel back the layers, and then ultimately, hopefully your client gets the outcome that they want and has the empowerment to ask for what they want in the bedroom?
Yeah, it really depends on how open the client is to doing the work. Because often shame is very, very deep and it takes a while to get to. And often it's very hard as well to come out of your comfort zone, right? So you mentioned in your Instagram story, which I saw today, that that you felt like it was really difficult, and you were really nervous about this whole episode and coming on here, because you felt, oh, these are just conversations I've actually never had before. And could I just question why you've never had them before? If you don't mind me
You're right.
turning
You're right in
turning the
saying that
tables
I
a
was
little
nervous
bit.
because I was very nervous.
Yeah.
Why have I never had these questions before? I would say I don't think my story is similar to yours at all. I think I'm very open, and my family's very open, which
Yeah,
is
great,
good.
great.
I just I really don't know. I don't think I have like that deep underlying. I don't want to say problems. 'Cause I don't think but things going on. But now I'm scared that if you peel me back, then you're gonna discover something. I'm not uncomfortable having the conversations. I think I was just quite nervous coming on because talking to you, you're an expert, and I knew the danger in talking to you for me is coming across as extremely ignorant and just not knowing, not being understanding of what maybe women or other people are going through, and coming across to everyone like, I don't know, just like,
Just a bit basic.
yeah, just a bit basic. But I always put myself out there, so I don't mind coming across like an idiot. But normally it's not on such sensitive topics. So here I was nervous coming on to ask questions because I am going to ask them.
Yeah.
But to come across like very blasé, and I don't want to come across as blasé when some people listening might actually be deeply affected by what you're saying and the messages, and I don't want to like brush them off as if they're nothing, because for someone they might be everything. Whereas for me, I might not struggle or relate to some things that you're saying, but some people will massively. And I don't want to come across as like ignorant and blasé about other people's issues to do with sex and anything in the bedroom.
Yeah.
I think that's why I was fucking nervous to answer your question.
Well, that's good. I mean, I'm glad we clarified that. And is sex a topic of conversation in your relationship?
Yes. Yeah.
That's
I mean,
great.
with my partner. I'm not going to get too deep into
Great,
that, but I
great,
think
yeah.
I'm pretty open we're very open with each other, but also with friends and things like that. I talk to my friends, not like your typical lads friendship group and stuff. Obviously, there's some of that growing up as well, but I'd say my groups are pretty open.
Yeah, that's great. I didn't have that growing up. In fact, when I started to experience a lot of challenges with my sexuality, I didn't really have anyone to turn to. And when I think about how scared and anxious and just hopeless that I felt at some of those periods in my life, I don't want other people to have to go through that. And some of it can just be very easily solved by having access to resources, which is also why I started the podcast.
Yeah. What you've mentioned there is probably one of my biggest fears, actually, is I would feel comfortable. I've got a selected group of friends that I would say put on one hand and I could tell them anything, right? So if I was struggling with my sexuality growing up, I'm confident I could tell this group of friends fucking anything, right? I can talk to them and I could call them out of the blue and they'll go for a beer with me, they'll go for a coffee with me, and they'll give me time. I would hate to think that one of my friends could not do that with me. So if someone in that circle for me was struggling with something like that, it would really sadden me and pain me to think that they couldn't confide in me and that I would take them seriously. Even if they know that I might not be going through something similar myself, I would hope that they could reach out to me just to know that I would listen or be there for them, not just with sexuality, but with anything. But as you said, not having that safety blanket, or not thinking that you've got anyone to go to, I can really see how that would cause a lot of internal problems.
Yeah. And for some reason, sexuality is always an extra vulnerable topic to talk about. So if you're having issues, it's not just you're having issues, right? So let's just say for a man who's, let's say, had erectile difficulties, it's not just, hey, I can't really get it up sometimes, which we all know is normal. However, on top of that, there is always an added mental load of, oh, if I tell somebody about this, are they going to judge me? Are they going to think less of my masculinity?
It's the male ego.
Absolutely.
Very fragile thing, the male ego.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you know it better than most.
Absolutely. But it's extra vulnerable, right? Than just saying, oh, I have a bit of a pain in my elbow.
Yeah.
Or I broke my leg or something like
A
that.
lot of people would rather snap their leg in half, I think, than admit that they've had erectile dysfunction or they're struggling with keeping it up.
But then if you think about it, why is talking about your penis different from just talking about any other body part? It's because of the conditioning and the shame that we have around our genitals, that these places are things that we don't talk about, that they're taboo, they're dirty, or they mean something. They mean something else. There's an added meaning if you have to talk about it. Because you would very easily tell someone, oh, you know what? I broke my arm and now it still hurts and I got to go to the physio and so on. So
Got to go see a doctor. Got to have it in a cast. Now we're getting into the sensitive stuff. Actually, I can't hand on heart say that if I struggled with erectile dysfunction, that I would go to my friends and talk about it. As much as I think they'll be there for me through thick and thin, I cannot tell you that I would go to them with that.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, because I know that they're going to be there for me and be my best friends and talk about anything. But that's a me problem. That's me not wanting to admit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now that you've said that, it's actually making me question things a bit. How comfortable I actually am sharing.
And that's a shame issue, right?
Well, it sounds like it. Stop peeling me back.
Sorry. I can't help it.
It's in your DNA. Yeah. I mean, you must see that all the time with your clients, right? And so when your clients come to you, can you share us, we've spoken about shame there. Can you share with us some of the other overriding issues that people come to you with, and then we can maybe talk about them a bit and see?
Of course. For women, it tends to be issues around pleasure. And that's because there is a very well-known statistic out there that in heterosexual relationships, particularly women, there's an orgasm gap, which just means that about 98% of men are likely to have an orgasm in a sexual encounter, while something like 60% of women will. And in general, when women come to see me, either they're in a relationship and perhaps they're having problems with orgasming with a partner. Some of them have problems with orgasming by themselves as well. So it usually tends to be around pleasure.
If they're having problems with their partner, will they come to you with their partner? Or is it like somewhat secretive that they come to kind of in private?
Interestingly enough, they usually come by themselves because they think it's an issue with them. And that they are the ones who are not doing something correctly.
Wow.
Interesting.
That is very interesting.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you think some of that's to do with like protecting the fragile male ego?
I very much think so. And that is why women from a long time ago, from ages past till today, they still fake orgasms. And the number of women who fake orgasms, the statistic is really, really high. And that, a lot of the reasons for that is because they feel like, okay, I've had enough, but I don't want to tell the guy that whatever he's doing is not working for me. And so I'll just fake an orgasm, get out of it. And
it's like a nature signal to finish the lovemaking.
Yeah.
Fake an orgasm and get out of there.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah.
God, I'm having a load of flashbacks now about my past self.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. It makes you think, doesn't it?
But also, I think there is also conditioning for women in heterosexual relationships to think about pleasing their partner and prioritizing their partner's pleasure over theirs. And part of it is that as well. And a lot of women tend to be quite passive in bed. They don't advocate for their own pleasure because they assume the man is going to be the initiator. They're going to do things to me that will give me an orgasm. And often when I work with women like this, I try to help to shift that thinking, to tell them that you are actually responsible for your own orgasm, your own pleasure. And it's not something you can just say, okay, my partner will give me an orgasm.
Lay back.
Yeah.
Make me orgasm.
Make me come.
I mean, that's what every guy wants, right? You just want to snap your fingers and be like, bang, I've done it.
No.
But that's not the case.
No, it's not the case.
So is there, for people listening, I'm sure that people can relate to exactly what you're saying, men and women, right? Men sitting there before this podcast thinking they're the man, right? Oh, she just clicks her fingers, so it's done. Women who are probably suffering with what you're going through, or with what you're talking about, sorry. Is there any like pieces of advice you can give them without seeing them face to face that you can give on this pod to say, these are some steps that you could do if you're struggling to orgasm with your partner or by yourself? What can they do to start that process?
Well, if it is the woman, I would always say you need to start with yourself in terms of understanding what turns you on. And I say that great sex with yourself unlocks great sex with others. And when you can understand exactly what turns you on, where you like to be touched, often I will recommend using something like mindful masturbation to do this.
What's that?
Mindful masturbation. It's masturbation, but with the intention of mindfully exploring yourself, as opposed to masturbation with the intention of, okay, I'm horny. Okay, I just need to like get it off. You know, that's it. Just need to like use the toy or use my fingers and just like as quickly as possible, like get myself off. Mindful masturbation is often very slow. It is something where I like women to actually look at themselves in the mirror, understand where all of their parts are, and you'll be surprised again how few women actually look at their genitals in a mirror. And then using a systematic technique just to work around the different parts of the vulva and also the vagina, and actually just try different things. And there's different techniques that you can go into, but you just try a system of different things. You experiment with yourself, different types of touch, different sensations. You know, sometimes you can bring lube into it. You can bring little bits of fabric into it to just see what feels good. Because the more you can understand yourself, that is the foundation and that is the cornerstone of how you can actually communicate with your partner and advocate for yourself in the bedroom, and say to your partner, okay, this is what I need to actually have an orgasm.
And then for the men out there, is there anything that they can be doing to create a more comfortable space for their partners to enable them to have that conversation and be open and communicate with them? What can the men out there be doing apart from just trying to get off as quick as they possibly can?
Yeah. Well, the first thing to note is that men have to go in with the idea that every partner in front of them, actually men and women, every partner's sexuality is different. And, you know, we talked a little bit about the male ego just now, but don't go into the bedroom with the mindset, oh, but this worked for my ex-girlfriend. So therefore,
Never pull out the action in the bedroom. That's rule number one.
Definitely don't bring. But this worked for all the girls that I've seen before, and therefore it should work for you.
That's like gaslighting, right? It's like a you problem then. Immediately putting the problem on them.
Yeah. So tips for men is to obviously have that kind of mindset going in. Secondly, is to just slow things down. Lots of foreplay. At least 20 minutes is usually what I would recommend as a minimum.
I need to take some notes here. 20 minutes, okay.
Yes. And the reason for that is because that's how long it takes for a woman's genitals to get really engorged with blood so that she is fully lubricated and so that the vagina kind of expands and tense and is ready for any kind of penetration if that is what you want to do. Yeah.
And then so it's good for the men because they can then say the sex lasted 21 minutes instead of just 1 minute, right?
Yes. And then obviously it's to ask her what she likes, right? It's to make sure that, let's say you're trying something, do you like this? Does this feel good? I always say to men, please avoid the question, did you come?
Oh, God.
Because
I swear, I thought you only saw that in movies.
because I think that puts so much pressure on women. And that's actually why women fake orgasms, because then, the man says, did you come? Oh, yes, I did. And so I think it's much better to ask, what felt good for you? What is what I'm doing? Does this feel good? Keep checking in as you're going. And I think those would be like my key tips for me.
I've seen on one of your blogs or previous podcasts the better in bed formula, which was the education, exploration, communication.
Okay, yeah.
So that is pretty much what you've described there for both men and women is the education. So feeling yourself and finding out what you like and what you don't like.
Yeah.
Exploration is that, but maybe with your partner and doing all of that.
Yeah.
And then being able to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because I wonder the number of people out there that probably have a kink of some sort or know how to get off themselves, but they're too scared to tell their partner about it, even their wives, their husbands.
Yeah.
Is that like a common thing that you see? Is that people know that they've got this thing that gets them off every time or that they're into, but they're just scared to communicate that?
Yes.
Can you give us some examples?
Well, I think it's hard, especially if what gets them off is what they perceive as something that is non-mainstream. And I think a lot of us, as I mentioned, sex is such a vulnerable act. We're naked and we're vulnerable. And to then say, oh, this is what gets me off. And if your partner says, what? That's weird.
Well, it's like the ultimate
It is
rejection.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is the ultimate rejection. And it's extremely, extremely painful. And I know couples who have gone through years, decades, without actually understanding what actually turns each other on because they're too scared to actually come to the table and have a very honest discussion about their desires.
Do you think stuff like that leads to cheating on your partner and playing up outside of the relationship?
I think that ultimately, if you don't feel seen in a relationship, if you don't feel fully seen and fully accepted, then there will always be something that you're hiding from your partner. And sex is one of those amazing experiences where actually, when it works well, it really connects you because both of you are in this vulnerable state, but you're almost merging together and you see each other and the best sex, I think, is often where you really put aside your cares, your worries, you're just so in the moment and you're so yourselves and you don't care about whether you got your jiggly bits or, you don't care almost. You're just so in the moment and you almost see each other and accept each other for who you really are. And that is so powerful that another person can give that experience to you. And when it doesn't work, then it kind of already creates a disconnect. It creates a gap.
I think trust would be a big element of that, right? Because exactly what you're describing there is I see it as like the difference between a single life versus a life where you found someone that you really love and you trust 100% and you're happy to be vulnerable with. You might go your single life, and I may or may not be talking from personal experience here, where you You know, you think you're having good sex or great sex even sometimes, but really that's all it is. It's just sex, right? And then you find someone that you're really in love with, and you unlock that kind of vulnerability that you never allowed yourself to have with anyone else. And as you say, it's almost like an out-of-body experience sometimes, because you just trust that person, right? You're happy to be yourself 100%, and you hope that that's reciprocated with you. And it's just like, and I can tell when my friends are just got in relationships. So I can tell because they might have been single for 10 years and then they found someone that they're really into. And instead of saying, oh, you know, we had sex last night, it's like, we made love last night. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, there's a change there. There's a change.
And that is so powerful. And you know, that kind of sex can really be the glue in a relationship as well.
How important then is sex in relationships? Asking the sex coach. So you have to say super important, the most important.
Well, there's a very common saying in sex therapy that says that when sex is going well, it is about 20% of the relationship. But when sex is going badly, then it is 80% of the relationship. And often it can be 100% because it could mean the end of a relationship.
Because people will use that to finish a relationship. This was a question a lot of my DMs were. A lot of my followers messaging with this question. So this is why I want to dive into it, because I had a lot of, and like, you know, shout out to a lot of my followers as well who gave the questions. And I think it's a good time to kind of transition to the Q&A. So let's continue with this one, because a lot of people messaged in with context as well. They messaged in saying they've been married for 10 years. They've got 2 kids. All this sort of stuff. There was a lot of context and detail in there. And they're saying they've kind of lost that spark, or they're in a sexless marriage, things like this. So what's your advice to those people? I know you just spoken on the importance of sex, but what do you say to someone, a couple, men and women, who are in those sexless relationships, or how do you kind of escape that or help those people?
That is actually one of the most common issues that couples will come and see me with, just because to answer your question from before. And what I would say is that to start with, they need to have a conversation about the issue, and they need to both want to change something. And you'll be surprised, because often you might find that one partner actually wants to change it and the other partner actually doesn't. And then you start to have a misalignment. And
so what happens in that situation? Is there any coming back from that?
Then I think you really need to understand how important sex is to you in the relationship. Because some couples place a very high premium on sex, and some couples don't. Some couples are very happy to just be co-parents and best friends, and all of that is great. You know, there's many different ways that you can actually be in a relationship, many different also types of relationships out there. But if you're somebody that values sex highly, then it becomes very difficult if your partner isn't aligned or isn't compatible.
And have you had any situations where that's the case, but they want to stay together? Is there any kind of like room for adjustment there? Would one person say to the other, well, if you need that, you're not going to get it from me, so you're going to have to go somewhere else to get it?
Well, that could be an option. So exploring a different type of relationship agreement. So monogamy is only one type of relationship agreement, right? And of course, you know, now you might have heard more about open relationships, now about polyamory. There's many different types of open relationship agreements that might work for the couple. I think also there are other agreements or other arrangements within the relationship, if you still wanted to keep it monogamous, that could work. So sometimes, for example, I encourage couples to think about sex as like a buffet and as a like a menu of options. And I think that a lot of couples only see sex very narrowly. They only see it as intercourse equals sex.
Mm-hmm.
However, in a case like this, I would encourage the couple to really broaden their idea of what sex is. And sex could, in fact, being sexual is a much bigger and more interesting uh, way to think about sex, because then you could have different options. So if one person or one party within the relationship doesn't want to have full intercourse, but maybe they could engage in something else that is sexual, that might fulfill the other partner's need. So maybe, for example, they could use a toy on their partner, right? And watch their partner have an orgasm, and that could be great. Maybe they could do just something a little bit more sensual, right? They could say, okay, I'm not into full intercourse, but I'm happy to give you like a sexy massage, something like that. So there may be ways even within a committed monogamous relationship to make it work.
So there are ways around it apart from having to either not have sex or go outside of the relationship for sex.
Mhm.
Okay, next questions. Oh, I've got quite a lot from my DM, so I
Okay.
did have to
Yeah.
try and streamline them a bit.
Go
I've
for
tried
it.
to pick themes, right?
Okay.
One of the themes, I'm not sure if you're the right person to ask for this
Okay.
because
Yeah.
it kind of fits in other parts of wellness as well.
Mhm.
But how important is things like sleep and diet and exercise to having a healthy sex life?
Very important. Very, very important.
In what ways?
So I guess everything that you can be doing that is good for your body is going to help your libido
Hmm.
generally. So because libido generally, and arousal is often linked to blood flow, right? So for the man, blood flow, erections, right? But for women as well, right? Blood flow, as I was mentioning, blood flow brings lubrication to genitals. And so if you have healthy blood flow, means that you've got a healthy heart, means that often you're exercising, you're taking care of your body. So I think there is a direct correlation there. I think also all of the things that are bad for your body, things like alcohol, they don't tend to be correlated well with pleasure in the bedroom. So again, for men, lots of alcohol generally you'll have issues with erectile difficulties, and for women, it's similar. Like there will be often issues with pleasure and satisfaction, inability to orgasm.
So the one night stand after a night out is probably the worst scenario you could possibly look for pleasure.
Probably, probably. And actually, that statistic that I talked about, which is the orgasm gap between heterosexual couples, for casual relationships, which is like the one night stands, the orgasm gap actually gets bigger. So it's especially bad for women.
Question on the one night stand and the casual relationship. Now this was not DM'd in, but I'm thinking of a situation, let's say, that someone that I know is in, a casual relationship. Now I've read or watched videos somewhere that it's a lot easier for men to have a casual relationship with a woman or a partner than it is for a woman to have that with a man because of a hormonal release or a chemical release when a man and a woman have sex. Is there any truth to that? Or what is that legit with the chemical release with men versus women in terms of a woman getting more attached to a man than a man to a woman?
I'm not sure that I know the scientific background behind that. But I do know that in society, the gender roles that we are assigned say that women just looking for love and men just looking for sex, right?
That's the stereotype, isn't it?
That's the stereotype. And I would say that that could also contribute to that.
Yeah, I think so. So it can be complicated situations, right? When you have a casual relationship or a situationship, I think they call it now.
Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure that it's actually true in all cases.
Yeah. Porn.
Oh, yes.
We haven't touched on porn yet.
Yeah. Huge.
This was
huge,
a lot
huge.
of my DMs were about porn,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a problem in relationships, if it's
Yeah.
okay to watch porn as a couple, as an individual,
Mm-hmm.
behind your partner's back. So is porn the devil or is porn okay?
Really depends on your agreement as a couple and how you view porn. I think that, some couples view porn, if one of the partners watches porn, it's cheating. Some people view porn as, why is my partner watching porn? Does that mean that they're not happy with the sex that we're having? So there's lots and lots of different things that need to be unpacked with porn within a relationship. And I suggest that this is one of the conversations that you have with your partner, because I think it's going to be very different for everyone. I would say that porn is one of those things where I don't think it's the devil, but I do think that it does give people a lot of misinformation and misleading impressions of what sex is. And that is because we often have very poor sex educations. So therefore, we see porn as education. And porn is actually entertainment. It's not education. And it's just like learning how to drive from watching the Fast and Furious.
Yeah.
That is like the metaphor that I would use for porn, right?
That's a great metaphor.
And I think it's harmful in that respect.
Yeah.
Porn itself, I don't think is the devil, but it's harmful in terms of, I think, as a substitute for sex education, it actually gives a lot of misinformation, and people feel that often they need to have sex just like the same way that people have in porn.
Do you think it's one of those that if you're aware that it's entertainment and it's not education, then you watching porn is way less harmful because you're going to the cinema to watch a movie. You're going to watch Fast and Furious and there's production behind it and it's not real, whatever. But if that is your education, as you say, if you're like a young adolescent growing up and you haven't been taught in schools or your family haven't taught you anything, and that's what you're watching for the first time for years you're watching that, you're thinking, fuck me, that is intense. And then you try and replicate that. You put pressures on yourself, on other people that you're partnered with. And then it doesn't live up to the standard, obviously, because I'm not Van Diesel, in Fast and Furious. Yeah. And then that's where the issues come in the bedroom. Yeah. So do you think by knowing it's entertainment, it's kind of, that's the first layer of being like, okay, this is way more approachable now than if that was your education?
Yeah. I think knowing that it's entertainment, that's good. That puts it in its place. But then also asking your partner, because you need to also compare porn with the real life experience, and making sure that you're asking your partner and not assuming that, just because this is what I've seen, this is what she or he is going to like, is also very important.
And then, so leading on from porn then, masturbation.
Yeah.
How does that fit into a relationship? How regularly should people masturbate, if at all, if they're in a relationship? Is it harmful to the other partner? Like, what's your views on masturbation in a healthy relationship?
I don't think it's harmful at all. But it's the same thing with porn and the same thing with masturbation. If not done in excess, right? And it's also how somebody is approaching porn and masturbation. Often, I'm going to put them in the same bucket.
Yeah.
Often,
I mean, if you're watching porn without the intention of masturbating,
nobody's watching porn to just kind of like sit on their hands
To watch popcorn and
and meditate. So I would say that if you are watching porn in excess, where it is actually affecting your relationship in terms of you are watching it so often that you are actually avoiding intimate
Mm.
situations with your partner, then it's a problem.
So if it's replacing the intimacy
If
with your
it's
partner.
replacing, yeah. I think that some porn can be an enhancement of the relationship. And I'm actually a very big fan of ethical porn. And I'm a big fan of work done by Erica Lust, for example, because she often portrays porn from both the male gaze and the female gaze. And she's got lots and lots of different types of sex that is being portrayed. And um, it's not just all from the same point of view, which is a lot of what the free porn sites will give you, because that is very much catered just to men.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't have a lot of variety to it. And it doesn't really feature a lot of pleasure for the women,
Or it's fake.
or it's fake. You're right. It doesn't have a lot of different types of sex that is portrayed.
So how do people find ethical porn? And how do you know if it's ethical porn?
I think it's great to follow directors that you know or producers of it. So, like Erica Lust. And I think often you can also know it's ethical because you have to pay for it.
Okay.
Yes. Because paying for your porn also means that the performance get paid well and it's not exploitative. And usually it's a level above in terms of they've created good working environments.
Yeah.
Often there is a lot of consent that is involved, and that all goes into ethical porn as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to summarize, masturbation, porn, let's put them together. They're not harmful to relationships if you know what you're getting into. And the most important thing is to have the conversation with your partner.
Yes.
To get on the same page about things. And I think that's a theme for a lot of the questions that we're having, right?
Yeah. Well, have a conversation about what porn means to you and, why you use it or why you like it. And I think just go from there.
Next question. Long-term relationships.
Yeah.
And I think I've got a question about like post children here. But the first one I want to ask you is like the fire in a long-term relationship.
Yeah.
So you might, let's say they don't have kids, right? But you've been together for a long time. How do you keep that fire, that lust element of a relationship that maybe was burning bright in the start of a relationship? How do you keep that element?
Well, it takes work. And I think that is something that's very, very important to realize, because most people will just think that sex is natural and it's effortless and it has to remain that way for the rest of their relationship. And in the beginning of a relationship, especially if you're falling in love, there are so many endorphins and hormones that are going on, and you will naturally just feel a lot of spontaneous desire, or what is called lust, in those early stages or the honeymoon period of your relationship. And that will just naturally happen. What then happens is that your hormones will have to stabilize at some point. And then you have to start moving into, okay, let's make this an intentional and conscious effort to prioritize our sex life. And this could be simple things like, let's have date nights. Let's have sexy date nights, actually. And let's do it once a week. And in the sexy date night, let's make sure we are finding time to talk about our sex life. But maybe let's also find some time to try new things, making sure that there's at least enough novelty or variety in your sex life also helps, because a lot of those hormones that we talked about, like right in the beginning, like dopamine, for example, is very, very driven by novelty. Um, and if you can still make an effort to keep introducing new things, I mean, you don't have to like swing from the chandeliers every single
You
week.
can. You don't have to.
You can, but you don't have to, right? Um, but, just make an effort to do something a little bit different, do something a little bit outside your comfort zone. Maybe bring a sex toy in, maybe wear something really sexy. I think also another thing that actually helps is when you actually think of those early days of your relationship where where the sex is super effortless and spontaneous. I would actually challenge that it's so effortless and spontaneous, because the thing is, back in those early days, you probably have a date with whoever you're really interested in seeing.
And then sex is
Yeah.
after.
Yeah, and the whole day you're thinking about it, right? The whole day you're like, "Ooh, like what am I gonna wear?"
Yeah, it's
you
just
know,
built up with this massive thing in your
it's
head.
built up,
Yeah.
right? And like, "Oh, maybe I'll send him a text of a naughty text or something like that." And you're building up all this anticipation, and then finally, yes, it does happen. It seems spontaneous in the moment,
True.
but I don't think that it's that spontaneous, because you've actually done a lot of
Yeah.
thinking and work unintentionally to build yourself up to.
That's such a good point, which I hadn't ever thought of before. Like if you've been
Mhm.
married for 10 years and you behaved for one day
Mhm.
like you were when you were first getting
Yeah.
together,
Yeah.
like a wake up text, a little message here and
Yeah.
there, like
Oh, can't wait for tonight.
buy new
Yeah.
lingerie, like
Yeah.
shaving everything if
Yeah.
you're a guy, making sure you're well groomed and then they smell nice.
Yeah.
All right, if you do all that, you take her out for a nice dinner, you do
Mm.
something cool to do, something new, something refreshing.
Yeah.
Like, well, fuck, that's a pretty good build up for
It
having
is.
sex later on.
It is. It is. Unfortunately, what tends to happen in long-term relationships, especially with kids, it becomes, what is date night? It's pajamas on
Yeah.
the couch, watching TV, and then let's go to sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so on that topic then of
Mhm.
kids, I've had a few questions on this one.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, women that have had some maybe like trauma during birth
Yeah.
and it takes a lot of time for recovery or something like that,
Mhm.
maybe a C-section and things as such. What can they be doing, or what can the couple, as a couple, what can they be doing together to help them on that journey to get back to a healthy sex life together and feeling comfortable with each other again after going through something so kind of like traumatic?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that I always recommend for women who have that physically is to obviously go to see a pelvic floor physio. They are amazing.
Mm.
But secondly, I think it goes back to what I talked about in the beginning, which is about seeing sex and defining sex as this buffet, right? So a lot of the times, um, when you've just had a baby, and things just maybe just don't feel that good in terms of internally, you also have to look at a lot of the stimulation and sensation that you can still have externally. And often that still feels pretty good. Um, and you can still get a lot of satisfaction from it. But it's to just also see, you'll have to adapt the way that you have sex. And I would encourage these people to not think about sex just as intercourse, and to try things like external stimulation, to try things like toys, or if everything down there is just, no-go zone at the moment because, maybe the stitches or whatever, there's so many other erogenous zones, in your body that you can also stimulate. And, maybe that is also access to pleasure. And maybe you will have to be a little bit more sensual for a little while. And then if that feels good, then you introduce, something, you go level by level. You start with something sensual, maybe just like body touch, and then maybe you add a next level, you try something else. And I think it's just a matter of adapting and experimenting. Um, I also do think one of the things that I've found in terms of working with women who are postpartum is often their body image is completely transformed. And that is actually something that needs to be carefully considered in your sex life, because often women who have thought about themselves, have a very healthy relationship with their sexuality, suddenly their identity becomes, now I am a food machine, right? And that is just not sexy at all. Um, so I think it's also having to think about that and accept that perhaps just at that season of life, that, you know, that may just be the case. And um, you don't have to have sex, and there's no pressure to have sex if you're not feeling sexy. If you're feeling, particularly if you're feeling very tired, you're in nursing, young infants, there's no pressure, right? And there's still lots of different ways to still be intimate.
Yeah.
And I think, again, intimacy is sometimes conflated with sex, but there's other forms of intimacy as well.
Buffet.
Yeah, it's a buffet.
And I think on that one, it's also important to note the male's role in making the female feel comfortable that you don't have to have sex. The pressure isn't there to have sex as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And you'd like to think that most men who have just, their wives or partners have had a baby would be like that, but maybe it's not the case.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, I'm not the expert, but I guess
No,
creating that space to be like,
correct.
we're in that stage of life now, babe. The priority is the kids and helping you feel better, you recovering.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot to be said as well. When you mentioned the female body image, again, I can't speak on the behalf of the whole male population. Something that I find really attractive in women is not necessarily their actual bodies, but it's like their attitude towards their behavior. So if I can see someone who's like really working hard to get better at something, I find that really attractive. Like someone who's maybe not a runner and then training for their first 5K and is like working hard towards a goal. I find that mentality really attractive because they're trying to improve themselves. And so I think women maybe going through that and postpartum, maybe they'll put your partner, if they, hopefully they really love you. And just by seeing you going through that struggle and doing your very best at life, for me, that's really attractive. And to see someone who's in that really tough part of life, but they're really trying their best. And you might not be the sexiest on the outside and, you've just had a baby, for Christ's sake. But that mindset is, I think a lot of men would find that really, really attractive. So I think for women listening out there, you don't just have to be dressed up in sexy lingerie the whole time. It's your mindset as well.
And one of the things that women commonly find very sexy in men is seeing them with their kids. Just seeing them be a father is actually very sexy for a lot of women.
Having the dad bod, what about the dad bod?
I mean, look, I think it goes beyond the, as we mentioned about great sex, great sex almost goes beyond that, right? It's like a union of souls sometimes. I did want to say something else, though, about, let's say you've gone past the acute season of having kids when they're infants and, all you're doing is just trying to keep this infant alive, and you've moved on to like kids that are a little bit older. Then actually, I think one of the biggest strategies and tips for couples in that situation with kids who are a little older is to schedule sex or sexy time or sexy date nights. And that's because otherwise sex will just fall to the bottom of a very, very long to-do list, unless you actually carve out time for it. And that may include getting a babysitter, childcare, even going out to a hotel for like an hour or two. But it has to be very intentional.
That's a very interesting point. And
Yeah.
as unsexy as like scheduled sex sounds, I'm sure when you're in that stage of life,
Yeah.
once it's in the diary and you prioritize it, then as you say, everything around it becomes different. You dress up, you go out for dinner, you go to the cinema or whatever. It's date night, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just, it's time, let's bag it out now. It's like, no, we're getting dressed up, we're going out for dinner, we've got a babysitter in. So it's not just scheduled sex. It's like everything around it, being with your partner, right?
Yeah. It's scheduled, intentional time with your partner. And I think no pressure. Sex can happen or sex can not happen as well. But I think it's just intentional connection. And I do think, though, when something is important to you, you will make time for it. You will schedule time for it. Because if you think about our gym appointments, our hair appointments, all of those appointments, they're appointments and they're scheduled. So if sex or if your partner or connecting in an intimate way with your partner is important to you, then schedule it.
Yeah, put it in the diary. And last question from the Q&A, and this was a very common theme, sex toys. And you've mentioned them a few times during this pod. What are your thoughts on them? Should sex toys be used in the bedroom? Should couples be using them? How do they experiment with sex toys? Give us your opinion on the toys. Obviously, you're an advocate. You're in business.
Obviously, I'm going to say yes, they should be used. But again,
is that a thing? Yes, they should be used. Is that like if you don't use sex toys?
No, I think it's up to the couple. I think toys are just one of the tools that you can use to explore and add variety and enhance sensations. So I think they're not the only tool out there, but I think they're very, very handy for those reasons. I do think one of the questions that I get asked a lot is how do you bring the idea of sex toys up with a partner? And if you've never actually used a sex toy before, I think one of the things that you need to do when you're broaching the conversation is to actually explore the idea of what are benefits that sex toys could bring to your sex life. Is there something that you want to explore, for example, that could only be achieved with a sex toy? For example, there are a lot of women who need a lot of clitoral stimulation from a sex toy in order to have an orgasm. And somehow in the bedroom or in the course of intercourse, they're not getting enough clitoral stimulation. So perhaps a sex toy could be used to supplement there. And the way it should be broached with a partner is that it's an enhancement and not a replacement.
It's not a knock on you.
Yes, not a knock on you.
It's going to be better for both of us.
Yes, it's going to be better for both of us. Exactly.
And it's in that umbrella you mentioned earlier of that experimental and then communicate, right? So be open to trying new things. It might be fucking terrible, but be open to it, right? It might be revolutionary.
Yeah.
It might take you to the next level. That might be the thing that you've been looking for that unlocks that intimacy again.
Yeah.
So you don't know.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that Q&A. That was very insightful. I mean, maybe I was just pretending that I actually got DM. These are all just questions that I've had, right?
Yeah, you've stored them up.
I've stored them up for years in my little red book, and I'm finally speaking to a sex expert, a sex coach.
Yes.
But that's it. Thank you, Sarah, for coming on. And for anyone listening, how can they reach you? How can they find out more information about you?
Well, you can reach me on my website, sarasense.com. Instagram for socials, hello Sara Sense, or you can also check out the Better in Bed podcast, which will hopefully be revived very soon with new episodes. But there are at least 58 of them waiting to be listened. It's a huge archive, multiple topics, multiple guests. And I think for people who are interested in the topic, they would benefit a lot from that.
Yeah, I've been on your pages. Check them out. They're awesome, very educational.
Thank you.
Very open.
Thank you.
One more question. As you know, the podcast is called Abnormal. And I know we've been talking about sex the whole episode, but we've also been talking about your story. You going from Singapore to setting up your own businesses, and here you are today. So a lot of the people listening, as we spoke offline earlier, the whole reason of it being called abnormal is so that people listening can see that you are doing something abnormal in your life and how you got there. So for anyone listening out there who wants to do something abnormal in their own lives, what's the one piece of advice that you would give them?
I would say you have to redefine the word abnormal. Because when you think about where the word abnormal actually comes from, it's from society, right? Societal norms. That's the origins of the word, right? And if you are doing something based on what are people going to think about me, am I going to fit in with what everybody else is doing, then that's not the right way to think about it. So you have to redefine, I think, the word abnormal to on your own terms, and think about it in terms of finding your uniqueness, forging your own path, challenging the way, accepted way of doing things. And then if you think about it that way, abnormal becomes amazing. And maybe we should all be doing something abnormal
I think we
every
should.
day.
And you are embodying that with what you're doing. So Sarah, thank you for coming on.
you.
I can stop sweating now. I've learned so much, and it's definitely an episode that I'll be re-listening to and re-watching. So thank you for your insights. And I look forward to you starting up your podcast again. And I hope to speak to you again soon.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Abnormal. If you enjoyed, please consider subscribing to the channel and give us a 5-star review in whatever podcast platform you are listening or watching on right now, as it goes a long way to help growing the show. Thank you, and see you in the next one.